So I think we're broadcasting now. Is that correct? Can people see it? Can you guys see it?
Yep.
All right. I think we're broadcasting now. Finally. Sorry about that.
Seeing some Inception.
Yeah. Seriously. So who do we got here? We have
just a little bit.
All right. Danny, Christian, Rob, Oakley. All right.
Yep.
So thank you guys for coming in. Sorry it's running late. Basically, this is the Read the Source that we do, where we go through source code every. Can you guys see it? Thursday?
Yep.
All right. I think we're broadcasting now. Finally.
Your Hangout's playing. Seeing some Inception.
Yeah. Seriously. So who do we got here? We have
Just a little bit.
Kill the YouTube.
All right. Danny, Christian, Rob, Oakley. All right.
It's all gone wrong.
So, thank you guys for coming in. Sorry it's running late. Basically, this is the Read the Source that we do. We go through source code every. Can you guys see Thursday? Yep. All right. I think we're broadcasting now. Finally.
Your Hangout's playing.
Seeing some Inception. All right. Yeah. Seriously. So who do we got here? We have
Just a little bit.
Kill the YouTube.
all right. Danny, Christian, Rob, Oakley. All right.
It's all gone wrong.
So, thank you guys for coming in. Sorry it's running late. Basically, this is the Read the Source that we do. We go through source code every. Can you guys see everything? Yeah.
I'd say everybody who's on, close all your tabs that aren't this.
Your Hangout's playing. Seeing some Inception. Yeah, seriously. So, what do we got here? We have just a little bit. Kill the YouTube. All right, Danny, Christian, Rob, Oakley. All right.
It's all gone wrong.
So, thank you guys for coming in. Sorry it's running late. Basically, thank God. All right. Are you guys able to hear now?
The hell was that?
That was horrible. First time Hangouts live.
And I did that the other day, actually. You have the YouTube in another tab that you don't see, and all of a sudden it's feeding back.
Nice. I didn't even know I was the one who had it on. I will claim craziness there. Because I had on the Google page, and it was playing on the Google page. The plus event.
That'll do it.
We're still getting some Inception.
Yeah, so I'm going to switch to, because I'm sharing desktop, that's why, so I'm just going to go to here. So today, we talk about Angular the last few months, but Read the Source is basically, for those of you who haven't been here, it's just something Chris came up with, Christian Smith, who's on the Hangout here, to go through like frameworks and source code. We were on an Angular open source thing that he was working on, and we were having trouble figuring out what was going on with dependency injection and some of these things underneath Angular, so we decided to do these Hangouts and kind of try and learn together what's going on. So I'm not claiming to be a crazy expert with Polymer, just a real fan and somebody who likes to go through the code and play around. So please ask questions. Feel free to answer questions that I may have on some of this stuff. And I did some work recently on a prototype where I did a full Polymer app where all I used was Polymer, no other frameworks, and native code. And I am not able to show it today, but I tried to break out some of the ideas and put it into the to-do MVC that's on the Polymer site, rip out what was there already, just so I have some other stuff I can play with later on as well. So that's Read the Source. As far as like what we're going to go through today, so I created this little mini app. I don't know if you guys have watched the movie My Cousin Vinny, but this is just an application that it's like a list of items, and I wanted to just go through some basic examples of template binding today, and the types of template binding there are. And we can't go through everything today, but if you guys have specific things you want to go through, we can go through that together. And I wanted to look at some of the polyfills, which Christian brought up to my attention today, because I was saying, what's the difference between a polyfill and a polyfill? And he said, well, maybe it'll work. Like, probably. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. So I have WebStorm open. Can you guys see this?
Yep, looks good.
Yep.
Okay, sweet. So one thing I did was I have this Polymer app, and I think the Polymer team has done a great job kind of breaking out, what an app might look like if you were going to use Bower components. You could use whatever you want as far as the naming convention, like vendor or whatever, but component seems to be pretty common. And the components you're going to be using really today. But if you have your own, you can put them in here. And so I created a couple.
Eric, I can't see your screen anymore.
Oh, no?
No.
No?
Nope.
Okay.
There it is.
Exception.
You.
Can you see now? Is everybody good?
I'm getting it. Yep.
Yep,
All right.
there we go.
All right, so I created a couple of different Polymer elements in here. I decided to just put them all very simple inside of one HTML import. And so what is Polymer and platform, and what are web components? I mean, I can go on for a long time talking about all the different pieces, and then probably all the pieces I don't know, other people could take over. Polymer is a really fast-growing web development framework that's built on top of the web components technology and uses Platform.js, which is a combined file of polyfills to fix the browsers that don't necessarily support natively the pieces of web components. And web components consist mostly of 4 components: HTML imports, which are like includes in PHP, or partials in Ruby, that type of thing, but native to HTML. It's not server-side. So that's pretty important. Not necessary for them, but I think it's good for for applications that you want to segregate things, piece them out, and reuse them. The other pieces are custom elements, where you can create your own HTML elements, not just tag names like you would with directives and Ember components and things like that. But you're actually creating like the prototypes and the properties, and on top of that the attributes, and these these native pieces that are part of that by using the register function register element on the document. So Rob is on here now. He's done a really good job with doing like this. You should look at his GitHub. I forget. I think it's Rob Dodson, right? Maybe. But anyway, it's the web component sketchbook, which has a really good information about building these natively. So if you wanted to try it without Polymer, there's a lot of really good examples on there. And so, some of them may or not be updated, but they're really cool to look at. So I created Polymer elements. Typically, when you create these, you'll have this Polymer element. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't go through the rest of it. So there's custom elements, imports, shadow DOM, which is encapsulation in the DOM. So that's one of the heavier things to polyfill, but it's definitely very useful. We've had this in the browser before, but never available for developers, for web developers, only browser vendor developers. So, like for instance, the input tag with type text or type, whichever, they all have, DOM elements if you look inside them, and we'll show you that inside of the console. But you're able to actually make your own now, and build that use document fragments and shadow roots. And there's some really good tools for working with that. And the last piece, there's custom elements, imports, shadow DOM, and and templates, right? So web components don't have template binding per se. They have template tags. But Polymer has template bindings on top of this, and this is basically, I guess, at the very low level, what you have in Angular with, the curly braces, handlebars, and now HTML bars, and all of these, templates. And people today, like Eric Brin and some of these other people who are working on these templating systems are doing a really good job speeding them up. I really want to take a look at the React way that they're building these, but I'm more interested in what's going to happen natively in the browsers right now. So Polymer has a way of... Go ahead. So Polymer allows you to create elements using the Polymer element tag, and it requires a name, and the name must be hyphenated. And that's for just plain old web components as well. So in this one, when you initialize a web component in here, you're going to use Polymer, and then you can have some default attributes set in here. And then you have some lifecycle callbacks. And these are basically when this element is attached to the DOM, or it used to be enter view or something like that, but now it's attached. There's created and attribute changed callbacks as well. Polymer does a nice thing where it wraps everything up, so if you have attributes declared, it'll automatically create a attribute change function that you can just apply. So what I've done here is I've created an abstract element, which is just going to be used to build some other elements. And when it's attached, it's going to set some user information. So it's going to parse the active attribute and then figure out if it's going to be hidden or not hidden for display. And there's other ways to do this as well if you look through the documentation. And there's also the set user and set display. Set display, obviously, set user is looking for the person, and then it adds to the profile. So this is the first one I wanted to look at. So this is template base. So it's it's extending template base, and now it's template bind. So this is just general binding. So there's two types of binding when we're
Eric,
talking.
I lost you again. Am I the only one?
Anyone?
I'm good. Looks okay to me.
All right.
All right. There, it's back now. I don't.
Okay. Might just
Maybe
be
something's going on my end.
or something.
Man, sorry guys.
So you can do it with if you use there's a few keywords you can use. There's bind, if, and repeat are the major ones. Adi Asmani tweeted back to me today. He said that they're having automatic binding, which I haven't had a chance to look at yet. But just the name of it sounds pretty interesting. Inside of Polymer are one-way bindings, except for form elements. And if you take your other elements and you publish an API for them, you can have two-way binding, and some other ways we'll show. But templates, you'll have to use some of these directives on, like bind, if, and repeat. So typically in Angular, for instance, you could do ng repeat on pretty much any element you wanted. But when you're dealing with template binding in Polymer, you're only going to be able to use the templates. So there's template binding, and then there's node binding. And node binding is what we commonly look at where we're talking about text content, where text is being parsed out like this. Like you'll see this inside of a text. You'll see also attribute binding. But template binding is a little different. So you have repeat and if, and I think there might be one other, repeat, if, and bind. So what bind does in this case is it's going to take profile, and then it's going to actually bind this particular object, which is inside my Polymer, and it's gonna bind the whole template to this. So when I refer to profile in here, if I wanted to grab something off of it, I can just grab it this way. Good so far? So what this looks like when you actually use it is, here's my template bindings import, and this is all I put in there. This whole thing, just tmpl-bind, is basically this whole section here. So if I look at this, you can see I now have the shadow root in here, which is the shadow DOM we were talking about before. It used to be you'd have the option. I noticed it was taken out in Chrome Developer Tools, but you can now view this in your tools by default. But you can disable if you wanted to hide native HTML stuff like input tags that existed already. If you don't want to see their shadow DOM, you can hide or show that. But this is not accessible without forcibly trying to do it to get information from inside, similar to an iframe, but more powerful. So then we have the output. Okay. Now with this, with the binding we saw in here, let me go back quick. So we have the profile. We're going to grab the profile picture, name, title, quote. So if I wanted to change this, right, I could take some information here, say this stuff. I can go in. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take and make this, I'm going to make a new model. I'm now outside of this element, right?
Oh, S. Hey, sorry to interrupt, Eric.
No, definitely. Go ahead.
Could you show the code again? I wanted to see the way you were setting up the template binding.
Sure, definitely. So
Yeah. Okay.
right here is the one we're looking at.
He heard me. Sorry, I'm talking with Eric as well. We're all sort of like sitting here watching. Eric Beidelman, that is. So I don't know if you need that top level binding.
Okay.
Template bind to profile.
Okay.
I don't know if you need that because you're referencing like profile.picture and everything like that.
So if I did that within the template, you're saying it would work just out of the box like that?
Yeah, because the template's going to automatically bind to your element and treat it like its model. So if you've got this .profile on there, and then, yeah, I don't know, refresh the page and see what you get.
Yeah, definitely. Let's take a look.
Maybe it all blows up.
Fixed my CSS. See?
Is that better? Is that what you wanted?
Yeah, that's fine. That'll work.
Groovy. Yeah, usually you don't put any sort of binding or anything on the very top level template. That's like your shadow DOM template.
Right.
So if you do need to bind to something, you would do like a nested template immediately under that. If you really want to bind to something like right away.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just have the one outside and then the ones that are nested inside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the ones that are nested, that's where you do your bindings.
Okay. Is there a reason we don't have like a template built in? Is because we want to have other things outside of it, like link tags or things like that?
Yeah, Eric is nodding his head yes.
Okay, good.
Huh?
So I have some other data I wanted to change in here. So if I set the attribute now to this data, yes, it didn't work. All right, let's take a look. It did something. So let's see what it did in the console. So it did set this. But now, it's not bound. I think that's what happened. So if I put that back, right, I refresh here. Nope, it still doesn't work. Fantastic. Basically, though, if you do the binding and you set it correctly, what should happen is it should update automatically. So you'll have, and do we know why maybe that happened? Does anybody have a thought on that? I can show you.
What were you trying to do?
So I'm trying to grab the element and set the attribute person through this model that I created. Let me quickly show you. I'll put this up here.
Yeah, in big in the console.
Big in the console. So, like this.
Set attribute person to stringify template bind data.
Mm-hmm.
That looks okay. You're trying to pass in like basically like a big JavaScript object as one of your attributes, right?
Yeah.
Your element doesn't expose an attribute named person. Are we talking about template base here?
No, template bind should, because I have it in base, I have it there, so it should inherit it. My understanding is, so I can actually put it in there and see what happens. So let's go in and try that.
Okay, so go back to it needs to be a property on the prototype. So you need like person colon like curly braces to type hint that you're going to be passing in an object. So right above like created, you could just write person colon curly braces.
Oh, it says a default for it?
Yep, that's going to type.
So I thought it did inherit the like if I extend the other one, should it inherit the defaults from there or no?
I believe it will. Do you have that on the parent?
Yeah, I do.
Well, you have it set to null. You need to set it to an object.
Okay.
Just an empty object. Otherwise, it doesn't have like a type hint, and it's going to be like, it's going to treat it like a string.
I'll take out the, alright, I got the binding out. Let's try this. Awesome. So what did we do there? So we went through and we just took a new object, passed it in. Good to know. Thank you, Rob, for that. As far as the getting the default attributes, don't set them to null is my takeaway from that.
Yeah. So the way it works is for your attributes, like Polymer is going to treat any attribute that you pass in as a string. Like that's what it wants to treat everything as.
Right.
And so if you want to pass in like an object and an array, you totally can. But you just need to, on the prototype, set a default of either like an empty object or an empty array, and then it will type in it and properly handle that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. So as far as like the polyfill for this, so do we know if there is like platform, for instance, is all like minified with a map? Is there like a unminified development version for the public out there?
Oh wait, sorry. Can you ask that again?
Is there an unminified version of platform and Polymer, the code bases, an unminified version to be used?
I don't know. I don't know if there are unminified versions of them. That was actually brought up recently. Someone else asked about that. There should be, if there aren't. And I think someone may have opened a ticket to. Right now, I think they get minified as part of like our build process, but that's kind of a bummer.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just like with just to go through like I'm looking through node bind and template binding here. When we go through, this is nice to see even just to go through and kind of figure out what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to do that with those is hard, so that's why I asked.
Yeah. I think there's an open ticket that John Han from Pivotal filed about this issue.
All right, I'll have to take a look. So this particular one, template binding, if the browser doesn't support template and it doesn't support the template binding at all, it'll polyfill both of those, is my understanding based on this. What's really cool too is like I put on this one. I put a console set up here. So what I'm doing when I click on this is I'm going into my object and I wanted to see. I'll just scroll this up. I don't know if you guys can see. Can you see this stuff here, the giant object? So one of the things I wanted to see was what exactly is this attaching to everything. So when I'm looking through these polyfills, what should I be looking for on this object? And some of them look like they're private, just so that or pseudo-private, so that like observers here, where you're doing the object.js or observer.js polyfill to find stuff, and maybe there's if it does exist, maybe this wouldn't be on there. I don't know. But it was interesting to see kind of if you took the actual node. I'll show you the code for this piece. So in the docs, I noticed for Polymer, you could actually, on click events, you can grab the template instance model, and you can look at that. And that's what this is consoling, is the model itself. And I have a couple of other things I thought were of interest, like grabbing the local name, grabbing something off of the model, and seeing if something was attached. One of the challenges I saw with a lot of the work that Chris Strom has been doing with Polymer Patterns book, he's been doing a lot of karma testing with these, and testing seems to be pretty difficult the way that I've been trying and he's been trying. I look at some of the Mocha tests though, and I'm like, wow, this is a much better approach. So one of the problems I've found is I have to do a bunch of checks usually to see if something was attached or not if I have a lot of elements. So like if my element depends on some other elements that are inside of it, I want to test one thing. And that might just be because I'm not testing the right thing. I'm not isolating something as well as I should. But it was definitely a struggle. Has anyone dealt with this?
I just dropped into the chat our seed element, which is our starter project, and we've added tests for that. And what we do is we do HTML tests. So we actually wrote a Mocha plugin that lets you just sort of import your elements, and then in a little script block at the bottom of the page, actually test the element after it's loaded. If you pop open that test folder, and then take a look at seed element basic.html. So this actually uses our plugin, and so we import an element, and then we import this one seed element. We actually use it on the page, and then we have a script tag where we listen for the Polymer ready event, and then we start poking the element. And these tests do not run as fast as a purely JavaScript-based test runner,
Right.
but they do avoid a lot of the issues that you run into when you're trying to set up these things as pure JavaScript tests, and you're trying to fake an environment and all these other things. So they run a little bit slower, but they're a lot easier to work with. So this is kind of what we're recommending people use when they write their tests.
For all testing, or are you saying just more of the integration, I guess, type of tests? Or?
I mean, we're using this for our unit test approach.
Okay.
Yeah, and it could. Yeah, I guess you could use this for more elaborate tests, like kind of like end-to-end tests, if you wanted to drop a bunch of elements on the page and like try and kick off some behavior somehow. I think it's still definitely like in its infancy. We're still sorting out how to do this. The main problem is that all the test runners out there and test frameworks were designed for, just testing JavaScript, right? And now we're doing something very different with web components. We're creating all these custom tags, and so there isn't a framework that is like built to handle this really well. So we have to kind of use plugins and sort of find our own way there.
The next Google project.
Indeed. Or the next really badass open source project from someone in this room.
True. So with the template binding here, thank you, Rob, by the way. I'm gonna have to check that out. Pretty awesome. But the template binding, we were just going through this with Christian the other day, and I scrolled all the way to the bottom. This is a pretty big one, but I start to see like there's some, where it's storing different types of bindings. It's mixing in some observation techniques, it looks like, and I haven't had a chance to really go through in depth because it's such a large file. There's a lot of things happening. But it's really well written, at least. So it's nice to see, to go through some of this stuff and be able to figure out, okay, well, get last instance node, what does this do? It's pretty self-explanatory, like with the naming conventions, easy to read, variables, maybe not as comment heavy as some of the frameworks that are a little older. Like, for instance, Angular has a whole bunch of comments for like every method usually, which may or may not be good, but it was helpful to go through it, for me at least. So with this, this was another thing with update dependencies. So let's say you have a template and it looks at the template tag, and the template tag is an inert chunk of DOM, as I've heard Rob speak at Cascadia.js about this, where it doesn't get rendered. It actually just sits there until you clone it into another DOM node. And what I did was I created a native web component, and I wanted to see how some of the template binding would work with that as well. But this is interesting how it takes the directives and it goes through and determines what it needs to do based on those. So if it's a repeat, it's going to set some, some values here. And if you look, if I go through, how many people here have used Ember or Angular? Or even better, Dart with some of this stuff?
Angular.
Nice. So there's the two curly braces here, but Polymer also uses the two the two array brackets back and forth to go through. So parse mustaches is one of the biggest, I think one of the biggest takeaways from this file for me. And this is, if you look through Angular, there's something similar to when they go through the same process. But this goes through, and because they're using a while loop here, they're able to break at certain points, which I find difficult with other types of loops inside of JavaScript. It used to be you use this one because it's more performant, but the browsers have caught up with all of that, as far as I could see. So if this is a curly brace, that's going to mean that it's going to be bound for forever until you tell it not to be bound anymore. But if you have the double array brackets, that means it's going to be bound just once. And so I think Dart has something like this too, which is why I asked if anyone has been using Dart, because I saw an article by Seth Ladd talking about this, where using Angular and Polymer together. Is anyone familiar with that? So Seth Ladd works at the Dart team at Google, and he had an article about this. And I don't know much about Dart at all, so I can't really speak to it. But that led me to find Chris Strom's information. I'll do that up here. If you guys are familiar, this is useful if you're using Angular with this stuff. So I need GitHub. So Chris Strom wrote a book called Polymer Patterns. It's a very good book. It's still being updated and changed. So I go to the repositories here, Angular bind Polymer. So what I found with this is really good for if you want to mix in like mutation observers, which are watchers for. It's what we use underneath to watch the attributes changing. So when an attribute changes, it triggers some mutation. It'll say it's an attribute mutation, or it's some other type of mutation that you might use. And Polymer makes that a little bit easier to work with, as we saw with the attribute changed. But this was pretty good. He also has a version that's non-Angular if you wanted to use another library as well. But I'll put that in the I'll put that later inside of the Hangout notes. But anyway, so this is a one-time binding is the point. So it just finds it and binds it, and then it takes away the binding, so it won't work again. So does somebody want to kind of go through this piece to kind of see what's going on?
I have to say that's just about my favorite function name ever, parse mustaches.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone?
Eric, have you tried wiring this thing up to the Chrome debugger and stepping through it by any chance?
So for this one, based on our issues with the Angular one that we did last time, I decided not to do that because we ended up going through a bunch of stuff that took a while from Angular into jQuery and all sorts of madness. But yeah, it did occur to me to try it again, see how it works. We could take it for next time and just use this file even, like maybe use this as a submodule inside of our app, and just use this with nothing else to see what we can do with just this polyfill. If anyone's interested in that, we could try that at some point. But basically what this is doing is going through and determining if it's going to be a regular parsing that it's going to do, or one time. So you're setting up these variables, and then you're checking to see if it's the one time, and then you're setting certain values based on that. And it's going to find the terminators, which is the end of it. And here, if it's less than 0 for the end index, and there's no tokens, then get out of there. So it's pushing everything into these tokens from what I can see. Now, if I'm reading this wrong, please let me know. I'm just going through. So if the tokens don't exist at this point, it's going to be an empty array. Or if they do exist, we're going to start pushing. Let's see. I'm not sure exactly what this is doing with the slice. So you're taking the last index and the start index. Okay, and then it's going to parse the expression if there's no prepare binding. Can everyone? I'll stop scrolling like mad here. Okay. And here's for processing the one-time binding. So it's changing those variables. It's passing the variables in that you've set from all that. And not sure. Let's see where this is actually called. Or not. What's in here? Okay, so in process binding, it's going to find if it's only one time, and it'll return it here. And if it's not, it keeps going, and then it processes single path binding. So we can find that too. And then this is mixing in with observer from the observe.js. Rob, do you know if I'm correct with that? So it's compound observer, and then there's path observer, and other. Okay.
Sorry, can you repeat that? Your audio is kind of cutting out.
So for with the process binding, it's going to look to see if it's one-time binding. If it's not, it's going to do the single path binding. But then it starts doing observations. So if I remember correctly, this is from observe.js.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the path observer, and I'm not familiar with compound observer, what it would be. So
hold on, let me ask. One sec.
Nice to have somebody at the source.
seriously, I think it's really awesome that Rob showed up and Eric on the other end. Totally didn't expect that. That's pretty awesome.
I wish some of the Angular guys had come to our last few meetups here.
Yeah, contact Aaron Frost or Brad Green.
Yeah.
Oh, Eric, super random. But while we're waiting, do you have a lot of have you messed around a lot with Angular resources?
Not a lot lately, no.
Okay.
I can probably say Christian has.
All right, we're working in setting up a factory or such to interact with an external API.
Yeah, that's the resource service, I think it is. $resource.
Yeah.
And that's the higher level over HTTP. I actually hate it, and I never use it. I just build stuff up from raw HTTP service. It's worked out a lot better for me.
Okay, well, that's actually good to know because that's what we started doing, and then somebody else on the team mentioned something about it, and on the very top level, it looked like it met the requirements we were trying to hit pretty well. But I have to bring that. Is there a particular reason? Or
I think it's just too high level of an abstraction for most things. I mean, it's really tempting to want to find a pattern that'll work for everything, but in practice, nothing ever does. So by the time you twist and contort that higher level abstraction to fit what you're trying to do, it ends up being just as complicated, if not more so, than starting out with smaller primitives. So for me, I found that I liked working with HTTP directly better, but yeah.
Hey, okay, I'm back. I have an answer for you. So Path Observer is used to observe, some property of an object, and it can take like a path to that property. So it could be foo.bar.baz, right? A compound observer can take multiple paths. So you could be like, I want you to watch foo.bar.baz, I want you to watch foo.bar.fuzz, I want you to watch like a whole bunch of things, and it'll just observe all of them. So it's basically just a bunch of path observers shoved into one thing.
Wow.
As it was explained to me.
Do you know like any? Do you know of any benchmarks for performance on that versus native object observed?
I know that Roth, the author of a lot of this stuff, has actually just started kind of putting some benchmarky type things on GitHub with big warning labels that they're not ready and not to be touched and everything. So hopefully that is forthcoming.
Right, it's part of the exciting though. Exciting.
Yeah.
Well, thanks though, Rob. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's pretty cool. Um, so yeah, there's a lot in Observe.js as well, in there, including this. So we should definitely take a look at that at some point. Let me get back to some of the examples in the code. So I have I have another template, and I will take out bind here. Actually, let me keep that one in. So I have a repeat and I have an if. I wanted to show the differences with these. So there's probably better ways to do this as I'm finding out. But with template if, like you could do, so if profile is a witness, let's say, and by default I have it as not. So if it has that particular property, then you can use this template. Otherwise, don't render it. And this is similar to ngIf. I don't know underneath if it works the same. We can look at the actual directive in the polyfill, polyfill. But that's the idea. It doesn't actually build it, so it's not like it hides it. It just doesn't build it at all. So let's take a look at that. So it doesn't show up, but I'll look and show you what it looks like before I'm going to add another model to it. So if I go into here, I'll look at my app, and I have it between these two. I'm going to look at HTML. So my template if, I look at the shadow root, I have the styles that were imported via the link tag. Incidentally, in native components, you can't use link tags. Polymer makes it a little easier, a little more familiar, but you'll have to use imports to get those in there. So not too bad, but so template if profile.witness. So, but notice all we have is an empty document fragment here. So it's not rendering anything. So if I went in, I'll go back to the console piece, and let me clear this. So if I clear it, and I go back here, and I have a snippet up here we can use for template if. This won't work, right? So I'm now going to say I want this person, Mona Lisa Vito, to have the witness. So when I set the attribute person, this should appear, unless I have that same binding error.
Eric, you're missing a V on your var.
Oh, I see. Thank you. So there she is. She's a witness now. So it took me a little bit to figure out, okay, well, I can't use these directives on other elements, and the reason it took me a while is because I don't read directions very well. And if you look at the documentation on Polymer's API, it is pretty straightforward as far as, yes, you can only use these on templates. All right, so now it's in there. And you can see there's the information we updated. So So that's the if directive. We can look at that if you want, or we can take a look at the rest. Everybody understand how that worked? We can look at the code again first. So here's the if. So notice there's no witness here, but when we added one, we added a witness. Something I also put in here is I added a filter. So you could do something like you could test. I don't know why I didn't use it, but I don't see me using it here. But filters kind of work. I'll just go to the documentation and show you an example there. It'll probably be much faster. So if I go to Polymer project docs, we'll go in here and we'll go into filters. So let me go through. Okay, it might be in expressions. So yes, some work in here. Here we go. So who's familiar with this concept in any framework?
Looks like it's similar as in Angular.
Yes, it's very similar. I found it a little easier actually to work with. You do the same idea where you're piping it through the filter here, and the example actually uses lowercase, which works out here. So if I find, or two uppercase, but so you have to pass in a value or whatever. So it's passing in, when you do pipe, it's like the Unix command, so it's going to actually pass in to that. So, but if you also wanted to add other parameters, you could do that as well, which I'm not sure. I've never done this in Angular, but I thought this was really cool, that you can pass in the extra parameters as well. So what it does is it takes the property that you have, and then it takes the evaluation and sends it to your filter, and the filter will take the evaluated property, any other parameters you have, and then you could do whatever you need to it. So it's easy to make really custom filters and chain them. Right? Everybody? Hello?
Yep. Looks
All
good,
right.
Eric.
Good to go.
All right. So for the repeat template, this is very similar to ng repeat. You can do expert in case.detail. So this is your object inside of your larger array or object. It's gonna need to be an array, I believe, but you're basically your collection. So you have this object inside the collection. You can also do as. So if you have nested templates, you can say, I want this to be as this particular object. And I'm sure there's other ways to use that, but that seems to be the way that I've seen it used. So I don't know if this is in Angular either, though, or even Ember, that type of thing. So in I've seen, but not as.
Yeah, it's you mentioned it a little bit, but will this iterate over objects and arrays, or does it have to be an array? Because like in Angular, it will do both. There are just some things you can't do.
I think you can do both here too. I am not sure. I've been using array objects mostly that have objects inside of them. So it's an array with lots of objects. So we could try it, like figure it out. But I'm pretty sure you could do both as well. There's also another syntax for this too, where you could do, I think it's something like this, where you can do, I'm not sure the exact syntax, but you could take your object, pass it in, and the index inside of this object. So if you have an array, or an object that'll do the count, I think. Again, I'm not sure exactly. But this would actually, you'd be able to use the index in this case. So I found that useful in Angular in some cases where you're grabbing $index when you're doing a repeat. Sometimes it comes in pretty handy. Not always. Usually all you need is something like this for most cases. I wonder though, now that we have, like, everybody uses template binding in major frameworks. I'm also wondering, like, are we going to be using template strings at some point to replace this idea? So template strings is an ECMAScript 6 piece that Dominic D'Nicola did a great talk on. If you can find it, the ES6, The Good Parts, it's called. And he talked about it, and I thought it was pretty cool. But it is JavaScript, so it's like JavaScript strings that you would pass in, like, using backticks. So what this will enable you to do is you could do, like, test foo and blah blah blah. So it doesn't care about you have to plus or minus, add, not minus, but plus all of these concatenated string pieces. And then you could pass in, like, whatever you wanted here, like you would with normal HTML type of binding. But in his talk, he talks about turning these into functions natively. And it's kind of interesting to see. You can play around with this stuff in ES6 or any Tracer environment, but it's not supported by any of the browsers yet. So I haven't had a chance to play too much with this, but I wonder if something like that might take over at some point. So, okay, pretty straightforward. So expert in case details. So if we were to create these, so far there's nothing in them, so I'm going to make a model for these and find that element. So let me copy this, and then I'll go back to the code for a second so we can see what's happening. So now we have a repeat template that's going to take the case details, and each object is going to pass to our other template bind from before. So we're using another template as well. So let's go in here. So we have here. And so if I go into my inspect, and okay, so can you guys see this?
Yeah.
We have the experts here. John Gibbons, George Wilbur, Jim Trotter III. And now we have, we're grabbing the template repeat. We're going to set the attribute active to true, because currently it's defaulted to false. And we're going to set the attribute experts to be the template repeat data, which is that model, basically. And if we look here, you can see they're all there now. So, good thing this isn't a CSS talk. But that's the basic idea with these. So that's template binding at a very basic level. And this code is maybe not the best ways to do it in practice, but it's just something we can go through. And I'll put this on the ReadTheSource GitHub when I get a chance to commit it. As far as node binding, is everyone cool with template binding?
Yeah.
So I know we're running a little over. I wonder if the recording is going to stop soon. So we have this node bind wrapper that I put in, and then inside of there I have this pair with me element that I created, which I haven't published yet, but it'll be up there soon. So it's a native component, and I'm just like the way I'm doing this now is I'm doing a lot of the techniques that Rob showed in his sketchbook with my own extra stuff for things that I thought might be helpful. And then I'm using just templates. I have a script tag here. I have a CSS file, which I'm using an import to grab. And there is a CSS, I guess, polyfill-ish type thing that you can do, so you don't have to do these. But some browsers will only support the actual tag name versus host. And the JavaScript here is a little different than... I wanted to show this as an example because Polymer makes it pretty simple to read and go through this. If you're doing it natively right now, there is a good amount of boilerplate. So the first thing you do is you create an object with some prototype that you're passing in. So then you're going to add to the prototype. You're going to add a created callback. This is equivalent to the created method on Polymer. Okay. So in there, I'm now going to create my shadow root. I'm going to grab the imports that I need. And the way that it is now, I do require an ID for this, but you could just grab the actual import by another way. And then you're going to grab the template that's in there. You have to append the child to the shadow, and then you're going to clone the template content inside of there. So then once it's created, now you have the attached callback. And there's a bunch of other stuff in here. I won't go through every single thing, but you're getting the idea. Like, so when I go through, I'm creating a style sheet, and I'm making an import here. I saw Eric Biddleman had some stuff from Google. He had some really cool stuff with doing styling, and there's probably some better ways to do it than I did here, but this is using an import. And here's the attribute changed callback. So this will watch all of the attributes. It'll give you the name, the old value, and new value. These get passed inside of the, like if it was image changed in Polymer, these get passed in, but the parameters are slightly different. So if you want like the new value, the third parameter is an array, and the first parameter is an array. So you'll want to take the first element in the array for new value inside of Polymer. Typically, I've seen people just grab the actual thing, like this dot whatever, rather than referring to the parameters, like I've done here for the native code. And there's some other stuff in here. And then at the end, you gotta send it to the window object and register it. So a lot of extra code and not necessarily as straightforward. So there is some nice pieces that Polymer adds in for that. So with template bindings in here, I have this wrapper, and I wanted to change the HTML with this maybe. So let me show you what I'm doing here is, so this thing here is really another element I created that's not this. It's a pair with me element. So what pair with me, if you're not familiar, is a pair program with me, pair program with .me, I think, from OptiGrim. And you can just tweet out pair with me on Twitter, and you can pair with people. So let's see, there's this, and then Where is it in the index? So I have it commented out just so you can see what it looks like. I'm going to take off the summary there so you can see. So this is what it looks like by itself. So it's just a little piece there. So this is actually this this particular native component wrapped in another component. I've just updated some of the bindings. You could change the bindings. I wanted to show that you can dynamically change, like where I have here, I have an attribute image, right? And then if you look at the code for this one, it's taking image and it's binding image inside of here. So what I found with these is if I want this to go back up, where if I've changed something inside of here, to go back up here, so that it actually changes the attribute on its parent, which would probably break a whole bunch of rules, that you would need to create your own mutation observer to watch that outside. So going back up, I've had issues with that. Probably design problems, but I don't know if anyone else has had similar issues with that. So on this one, what I've done too is I wanted to show that you can get bidirectional binding on other elements using publish. And what this does for Polymer is it'll create an API for an element that's publicly accessible. So I was experimenting with this on a Go instant thing I was working on, and I've since had to put it off for client work. But okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's been. I think we're working on a month before we've done any kind of update on it.
Yeah, Danny's been pairing with me on it, and yeah, it's been like a month. I feel icky inside. So we'll have to work on that though, Danny. So I'm going to grab the node bind wrapper, and I'm going to check first. I'm going to just check to see that this exists here, because typically you won't be able to access anything. Like if I wanted to do, you know, I wanted to just find, you know, image, right? Because image exists here, right? Or is it summary? Or yeah. So yeah. So image exists. So if I said this dot image, just to be sure, well, it's going to treat it like a string anyway, as Rob said, but oh, never mind. So yeah, so you can grab things on this, but if you do if you want to have a method or an ES5 getter or something, you could do that as well. But what's cool with you can create these bidirectional bindings by using the publish API, or by using events to run stuff that's happening. So if I change this, I'm going to change what this does is it's going to change summary to whatever I pass in, or it's going to get it if I don't pass in anything. So if I look at this now, you'll see that, you know, the text is now changed below it. So I haven't figured out if this is more useful than other things yet, but I found the best way to pass information so far has been through events, and using either custom events straight up, we're using, Polymer signals, which are pretty cool. They're still in either labs or dev. I forget which one it is.
Do you have an example of one of the ways you were doing it?
I do. Can't show it because I used it on a prototype.
Okay. All right.
But I will
Fair
do
enough.
one for the next time when we talk about events in August. When I do another one, I'll have something by then. So yeah, I mean, you could use events like in here. This is similar to, if you're familiar with Angular ng-click, right? Except you have on-click, and now you can just grab this thing on here. So whenever I click on it, it's going to run this stuff. And Polymer has added stuff to the event and the event target. So now you have other information. So that's how I was able to get the template instance and the model and change these things. If I wanted to, I could run another method that does some other stuff to update another piece of the model. And I could just refer to it, since I'm still in the object. I could just use this to refer to the object and its model, like this dot whatever. So that's another way you can make stuff two-way bindings that won't normally be two-way bound. And that's pretty much it for the binding piece. I want to go through node bind a little bit, but yeah, definitely look through these. I posted links to these in the Hangout notes and everything. I'll have to put the seed element in there as well. There's a lot of cool stuff in labs and dev if you guys get a chance to look at it. So any thoughts on this?
Good job, man. It's good stuff.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Any questions or thoughts on these things?
I feel like I need to spend more time building stuff with Polymer to really grok this the way that we did with Angular. You know, when you're working with it every day, makes a big difference. But I'd really like to see a little closer how some of these things actually tie in. You know, and watch the Polymer code at work. I think from looking at it, it looks like it's pretty linear. And it might, I mean, some of these functions, they don't look like they jump all over the place to 50 other functions, and it might be good stuff to be able to step through it in the debugger and just inspect the state in the debugger and then watch how the DOM is changing at the same time.
Yeah, maybe we'll do that for the next time with the communication piece of it. Yeah, I mean, we can definitely try a few different things. We can do that with Angular as well. I think
we discovered it works better sometimes than others. Depends on the code, but
yeah, definitely. But we're not having to piece in another framework like jQuery or something in here.
Yeah.
So I mean, as far as like, you know, having to work with these every day, like Angular and stuff, most of the stuff I've been doing is, you know, to be fair, prototypes. But I mean, now that Polymer will be in beta once Chrome ships with all of these pieces so they don't have to be polyfilled. And I say Chrome, but because they seem to be the fastest at getting stuff out. But I think once one browser, based on the talks from the San Francisco HTML5 meetup, it seems like once that happens, that people will start building more with it. And then probably by the end of the year, we're going to see more stuff in production. Like Salesforce has a production app already in there. I don't know if it's for a limited customer base, but there's some stuff out there already. But a lot of people are kind of iffy whether they could use it or not versus something like Angular or Ember. I didn't realize Ember went back to IE7 and IE6 support as well. Which I don't
know. Went back to IE6. That's actually fairly impressive.
Yeah, it's scary too, though.
That was my initial thought when you said that. That's scary. Yeah.
So yeah,
Um,
that's my opinion on it.
but yeah, Addy Osmani said I asked him on Twitter um, about when some of the things with Polymer would be native in browser without all the polyfills, and he so this was about this was maybe a month ago or so, and he said 3 to 4 months for Chrome, and then he gave longer timetables for the next one. So it would be Chrome, then Firefox, and then he grouped Safari and IE together for like next year.
Yeah. I think Opera will have a good amount too once Chrome has it. They're sharing Blink, right? So I think some of the stuff will be in there.
Which is awesome, but nobody uses Opera, so it's to me still kind of worthless. I mean, it's kind of terrible to say.
In the States, right? I think it's pretty big overseas, though.
Is it?
Still, I don't know. That was my understanding.
I haven't used Opera since that was the browser that the Wii used, and I tried it on. So
I still have that Wii.
that was an experience all unto itself.
All right. Well, nice. So is there any questions on this stuff?
Do you think for next time you could have some examples of the way that you did handle like some of the two-way binding stuff? Because I know you mentioned it and then you said you couldn't show it to us.
Yeah, with I'm gonna the next time I'll do events and things like that, communicating with local storage, passing data back and forth is what the next one will be.
Okay.
So yes, the two-way binding though, like as far as that, do you mean like using node bind or template bind with the mustaches and the array syntax?
Yeah.
Are you talking about like?
Yes. So like, so like you said, it's one way binding, treating it more like you would treat Angular, because I mean a lot of the form factors of it are very, very similar. Like with like with the way that you put the templates together, how you iterate over arrays and objects. So it would be kind of nice to have that, with the experience I do have with Angular, it would be kind of nice to figure out how to get it to behave more similarly to it.
Mm-hmm. Or understand why it doesn't. Right?
Yeah.
One thing I like about this that I noticed while you were going through the stuff, Eric, was seems like it's a lot more hackable from the console than Angular is, with all those modules and closures and services and stuff like that. They've got everything so neatly abstracted and separated away that, I mean, if you want to tinker with it while the app is running, you almost have to re-bootstrap the whole thing in the console to get there. Seems like you can pretty easily access the elements. Do you have anything else to say about that? I haven't worked with the Shadow DOM or any of that stuff at all. Does that get in the way? How much of a sandbox are you operating inside one of these elements? Is it like an iframe, or is it like a web worker where it's in a completely isolated space, or what's the story there?
Yeah, so I don't know technically what it is, but my experience with it has been that the Shadow DOM is pretty hard for me to grasp at first, because I'm used to having access globally to all elements. So like when you use jQuery, if you do a selector, you know it's going to pierce through everything. So like CSS, for instance, will they have CSS that will pierce through the Shadow DOMs. It's not, it's called, scope module CSS. You can do like /deep/ whatever. So you can use CSS to pierce through these DOM structures, these fragments. But Eric from the Google group. He's the lead on Polymer. I think he's still the lead. All right, so he has something you can use if you want to play with Shadow Tom that was really helpful to me. It's a tool where you can go through and just it'll visually show you what's changed. Here it is. So I would watch this video. So I'll post this in the chat in the way to answer your question, Christian. But I'm finding that the more I work with it and understand it, the less static it is. It's just a question of changing that mindset has been what I've experienced.
Cool.
Because like accessing stuff through the Shadow DOM with JavaScript, if I do stuff with like document.query selector, inside of the console, I'm not going to be able to pierce through that, as far as I know, through the Shadow DOM.
Mm-hmm. That's also kind of the point of the Shadow DOM.
You can grab stuff, and you can access the document from any element. Yes, exactly. So is my point. So let me find the inception. Just us two.
Yeah, I agree that it's. Yeah, but I don't have nearly as much experience with Polymer as Eric does. But the little bit that I do have, it's like he said, like you're used to seeing this very exposed on, even with things like you were talking about with Angular having really having to dig into it if you want to mess around with it in the console, stuff like that. Polymer, it's something that'll make you pull your hair out a little bit at the beginning because you're doing things that you know work everywhere else and do not work with the Shadow DOM, which can be frustrating. But again, like Eric said, it's what it was built to do, and it's how you have to go about thinking about it, which takes a little bit to rewire your brain to do that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm still not there, so.
Well, every time I turn my head, everything updates too. So there is. I was just looking at the docs for all this, and there's so much new stuff that it's like crazy to me. I don't even think this thing recorded.
Yeah, I haven't.
That's awesome.
It's my favorite. But yeah, but Eric, it's, like you said, with the the last time I've touched Polymer was working on some of that Jonas and stuff. So I'm terrified to look back now and see what all has changed.
Yeah, I know Angular is going to be shaken up pretty hard here too with 2.0.
Yeah, and I'm
It's coming.
a little bit.
I've had my head buried in Node code for the last couple of months. I haven't paid any attention to front-end stuff at all. So I'm a little bit scared to get back into it, honestly, because 2 months in web is like 20 years anywhere else.
Yeah. I'm at work. We are building our first application on a full mean stack, which is exciting to us. Nobody else in the studio cares, but we're really excited about it. I'm still working with. I'm still not real great manipulating Mongo, but the core app, it's the same one I was talking about where we were talking about the resources. So the main API is not inside of this application, so we have a little more room to break it, I guess.
There you go.
We don't have to worry about we don't have to worry about the things we're going to be manipulating with Node and Mongo and stuff being as instrumental to the application crashing and burning and making everybody really upset.
Yeah. So how are you liking working with that stack?
It's kind of nice because you don't have to switch your brain around when you're going from the front end to the back end. Just obviously in terms of the language. One of the downsides that I have found is that writing Node code is obviously not the same as writing front end
Definitely.
JavaScript code. So one of the problems that you do have is that since everything feels very similar, you move from one to the other, and sometimes you can get a little bit mixed up. Because when you have separate languages, when you're using JavaScript for your front end, you're using PHP or something for your back end, they're very, very segregated. When you move over to another one, you don't get messed up. This you tend to, and I'm not a Node expert either, so I
think the big one is front end people when they come to Node, they really, really fight the callback thing. You know, everybody wants to go with they want to find a way to wedge promises in there, and you know
promises are hot.
They are on the front end because everything is wired up around promises, but in Node everything is done around callbacks. So that's really a source of cognitive dissonance that I've heard of from a lot of people. And you know, definitely a lot of things are different, but I kind of have a when in Rome, do as the Romans approach to it, and it makes it a lot easier. I haven't used the mean stack, you know, that as a framework. I've been happier just using the parts separately. You know, Express or Restify and whatever, and just building APIs, and then Eric can tell you about this, and we get some experience working on just static front-end apps, and you know, wiring things up to completely discrete, separate API services. So that model for me has been working out really well, because I'm thinking, why do I want to mix up static assets with my API, and why do I want to mix up, you know, an API server with my static front end, right?
Which is one of the when we first started the application. One of the reasons we decided to go with the mean stack is because, like I said, because the API is isolated off somewhere else, so we had a little more chance to play. I'm an Ember guy who's being slowly converted over to Angular, and Angular's routing is really terrible. And I love a lot of things about Angular, but it took that when going from writing Ember code to going to writing Angular code, you have to let a couple things go that are just not going to work the way that you expect them to. So one of the benefits going over to the stack, at least with using Express, is we can use Express's routing and to do some things if we really, really need to. So like not entirely treating it as a single page application.
Right.
Now we are building off of the Yeoman Angular full stack generator, which is great, except it's kind of broken and you have to fix it. You have to fix the unit testing stuff.
I found that with almost all things Yeoman, actually.
I love Yeoman. I love Yeoman so much, but then you update. It makes me. It's one of the only things I'm always very tentative to update, because that's exactly what happened. I had a generator going. I was working exactly how I expected to. I updated to, I think it's at 1.4.3 or something, and all the unit tests failed because they moved some files around and some things aren't being put in there the way you expect them to. So we used it as a base, and we built our own mean seed.
Cool.
Yeah, repository to work that way. So we can still use all the generators and stuff, which is really nice. But we don't ask people to but we don't want to have to go through it. It took us a couple days to dig through everything and poke holes in it and fix those holes and stuff like that. So now we have a pretty solid base to work from.
Have you tried the what is it, the Angular UI router at all?
I haven't messed with it a lot. I've heard whenever I talk to people and I complain about Angular's routing, they tell me to look at the UI router. The current thing we're using is not using that, and I haven't looked into it as much as I probably should have at this point.
You know, it does a lot more stuff, but it's been like alpha. I don't know. I haven't looked for a couple of months, but it was like alpha for a year, and there were a lot of changes going on. So, you know, you had to be a little bit careful about fixing to a specific commit to make sure that that your stuff would keep working, and the documentation kind of sucks. So I found out I had to read the source code to figure out how to use it for what I wanted.
All right, that is pretty bad documentation. Is if the comments in the source code are better documentation than
comments?
the actual...
No, I mean the code itself. No, not the comments. No. And also the issues, like when you have to start digging around through issues and looking at discussions about how they're thinking about building something and it's not quite fleshed out, and then you got to throw a few little code wedges of your own in there to get it to work. But overall, I found there was so much more that I could do with UI router, but I still avoid it